An easy-to-understand guide for defeating Darwinism by opening minds, by Phillip E Johnson, the author of Darwin on Trial. Chapter 1, Emilio's Letter, 3 Common Mistakes. A student from a European university posted an email message on a public internet forum in order to explain how creationists and evolutionists can make peace. I've changed the spelling and grammar a bit to conform to standard American usage, but in substance, the message is just as this young man, whom I will call Emilio, wrote it. I've been a Christian and a creationist all my life, fiercely against evolutionism until I started my biology course at the university and began learning about evolution. Guess what? I am still a creationist, and now I'm also an evolutionist. It has become clear to me that the first chapter of Genesis is an allegory. If not, check how it states that there was morning and evening before the creation of the sun and the moon, an impossibility. And once we accept this, there's no reason why God could not have created all there is in as many million years as you wish. If God created time and space, then he is outside of it, and therefore is not affected by it. Time has no meaning to God. I believe that God created the laws of physics, and therefore everything that results from such laws in God's creation. To say that the species evolved does not deny God's act of creation. Quite the opposite. Evolution is the science that studies how God created the species. Furthermore, evolutionism and creationism cannot be put in the same category, as one is of science, of rationale, and other is of faith and of supernatural. I'm a Christian, and it offends me to see that Christians are being viewed as lame brains just because some well-intentioned but ignorant brothers of mine try to discuss such matters without scientific knowledge. Please stop. You do more harm than good. Emilio's statement brought a rueful smile to my face because I've heard the same reasoning so many times from American Christians and from agnostics who have figured out how to get Christians to adopt agnostic ways of thinking. Of course, Emilio is doing his best to cope with a difficult situation, but he has committed the 3 basic mistakes that have done more than anything to disable Christians and other theists from talking sense about God to the world. Mistake number 1, it's only about length of time. First, Emilio has trivialized the conflict between evolution and creation, portraying it as merely a dispute over whether the word day in the book of Genesis can be interpreted figuratively rather than literally. His logic is that if the, quote, days of Genesis are really a poetic way, his logic is that if the, quote, days of Genesis are really a poetic way of describing long geological ages, then evolution, quote unquote, is merely God's chosen method of creating, and one can with difficulty, and one can, without difficulty, be both an evolutionist and a creationist. Like many mistakes, this one contains grains of truth. St. Augustine wrote many centuries ago that God is outside of time and the creator of time, and certainly God can use a gradual process of creation over millions of years if that is what he wants to do. If that is what he wanted to do, forgive me. Emilio is right that we shouldn't refuse to consider genuine scientific possibilities just because we insist on reading Genesis more literally than perhaps its author intended. Unfortunately, this much too easy solution to the problem rests on the misunderstanding of what contemporary scientists mean by the word evolution. If they meant only a gradual process of God-guided creation, then Emilio might be on the right track. A God-guided process is not what modern science educators mean by evolution. However, they're absolutely insistent that evolution is an unguided and mindless process, and that our existence is therefore a fluke rather than a planned outcome. For example, in 1995, the 1995 official position statement of the American National Association of Biology Teachers, hereby called NABT, accurately states the general understanding of major science organizations and educators. The diversity of life on Earth is the outcome of evolution, an unsupervised, impersonal, unpredictable, and natural process of temporal descent with genetic modifications that is affected by natural selection, chance, historical contingencies, and changing environments. And those are the words. The word unsupervised and impersonal were deleted from the NABT statement after this book was originally published. For more details, see notes on page 120. I was reading the note. Or, in the words of the famous evolutionist George Gaylord Simpson, quote, "Man is the result of a purposeless and natural process that did not have him in mind," end quote. I will explain in subsequent chapters why the biologists insist that evolution must be unsupervised and why God's purposes are not listed among the things that might have affected evolution. For now, I will just say that this claim is not one they can afford to abandon, because their whole approach is founded on naturalism, which is the doctrine that nature is all there is. If nature is all there is, then nature had to have the ability to do its own creating. Darwinian evolution is a theory about how nature might have done this without assistance from a supernatural creator. That is why evolution, in the Darwinian sense, is by definition mindless and godless. Pretending otherwise is an evasion of the conflict, not a resolution of it. Yet many Christian theologians and educators take this evasive approach because they're hoping to find an easy way to avoid coming to grips with a very difficult problem. That's mistake number one. Emilio is kidding himself about what evolution means. It doesn't mean God-guided, gradual creation. It means unguided, purposeless change. The Darwinian theory doesn't just say that God created slowly. It says that naturalistic evolution is the creator, and God had nothing to do with it. Mistake number two. God made the laws and then retired. Excuse me. Hold on. Okay, let's continue. What I've said so far is fairly well known because the scientific authorities have spelled it out again and again. I suspect Emilio understands this at some level, because he also proposes a different way of reconciling evolution and creation, and thus makes his second mistake. Even if evolution itself was mindless, God could be still. That is a typographical error in the book. God could still be the author of the ultimate laws of nature by which evolution operates. Thus, we have Emilio's second attempt. God made the laws of physics and chemistry, and evolution follows those laws. Therefore, God is ultimately the creator of everything, even if evolution was, as the Darwinists say, unsupervised and purposeless. The notion that God is a remote first cause who establishes the scientific laws and thereafter leaves nature to its own devices is called deism. Deism is different from theism, which implies a God who takes an active supervisory role in the world, like the God of the Bible. When Darwinists say that their theory does not deny, quote unquote, the existence of God and claim that they are saying nothing about religion, they usually mean that they're willing to allow deism as a possibility for people who are unwilling to give up God altogether. Ain't that nice? Okay. Many evolutionary naturalists see no harm in making this concession because a God who confines his activity to an ultimate beginning of time is unimportant to human lives. The important question is not whether God exists. It is whether God cares about us and whether we need to care about God's purposes. Deism answers no to these questions. For that reason, even George Gaylord Simpson found deism to be perfectly consistent with his Darwinian doctrine that our true creator is a purposeless material system. So, that's mistake number 2. Emilio is willing to exchange the creator God of the Bible for the lifeless first cause of deism. It's like trading real gold for counterfeit money. Mistake number 3, giving away the realm of reason. That deism is not Christianity is pretty well known also. And again, Emilio seems to have some awareness of this. So he makes a third attempt, and in the process rediscovers an error that many prominent theologians and philosophers have made before him. The Bible says that, quote, in the beginning, God created. And in the beginning was the Word. The kind of science Emilio is worried about says that in the beginning were the particles, and creation required no pre-existing mind or purpose. One account starts with God, the other with matter. They seem absolutely opposed to each other. But could it be that the opposition is only apparent, the result of comparing unlike things as if they were similar? Consider this example. Artist says, the Grand Canyon is sublimely beautiful. Scientist says, it's a big old hole in the ground. Okay. I'm going to get through this, I promise. These statements may seem contradictory on a superficial reading, but of course they're both perfectly true. The Grand Canyon is a big old hole in the ground, and it's absolutely sublimely beautiful. The superficial contradiction disappears when we understand that an artistic statement about beauty deals with a different realm from a purely descriptive statement about the bare facts that the Grand Canyon is old and deep. Maybe the same thing is true about apparent contradictions between religious and scientific statements. Maybe the statement, in the beginning God created, is like the artistic statement about the Grand Canyon. It's about how we perceive the meaning and beauty of the world. Maybe the scientific claims about mutation and natural selection are like the statement that the Grand Canyon is a big old hole in the ground. They're about bare physical facts, and hence they do not really contradict the higher level statement about meaning, purpose, beauty, and God. In that case, the scientific facts do not matter, whatever they are. Emilio can proclaim with relish a complete naturalism in science and insist that it makes no difference to faith. He might explain his position in words like these. Yes, the diversity and complexity of life are the result of evolution. Yes, evolution is a blind, unsupervised, and unintelligent process. Yes, we humans are the result of a purposeless and natural process that did not have us in mind. Isn't it wonderful that science, reason, has discovered all this knowledge? Of course, none of this scientific knowledge contradicts my religious belief that God is our maker, because science is known to us by reason, and religion is a matter of faith. Science is known to us by reason, and religion is a matter of faith. The faith versus reason and belief versus knowledge mistake is very seldom stated that clearly. Clear, simple statements tend to arouse our common sense, supposedly. I don't know, in 2021 or 2019. Sorry, I inserted my opinion. Forgive me. Let me keep going. Where am I? Clear, simple statements tend to arouse our common sense, which tells us that Emilio is trying to ride two horses that are going in opposite directions. Rather, this third mistake thrives on the obscurity provided by big words and lengthy academic books. The third mistake is not as simple as the first two. It is a sophisticated mistake, and hence it has an irresistible attraction to intellectuals who are looking for a way to convince themselves that there's no need to deal with the conflict between theism and scientific naturalism. Fortunately, Emilio states the mistake artlessly, so we can more easily understand what's wrong with it. Exactly what is wrong with the idea that religious statements belong to the realm of faith, while scientific statements to the realm of reason? Let's consider how Emilio's professor and fellow students understand this distinction. They knew that people believed in all kinds of things: astrology, spirit guides that communicate with dead people, space aliens that kidnap humans from bizarre scientific experiments, and the God of the Bible. From the scientific naturalist viewpoint, all such beliefs are about equally rational. Any of them can be justified by any appeal to faith. Against such an appeal, rational argument and evidence are helpless. Here's a familiar example. Some small children believe that Santa Claus brings the presents they receive at Christmas. They believe it on authority. Mom and Dad told me. And because it's a satisfying myth, one that makes them think they're loved by some great being beyond their family experience. Then one day a child hears from a slightly older friend that Santa is not real. At first, she regards this as an unholy lie, but the friend talks our little girl into performing a scientific investigation. She keeps herself awake after bedtime, somehow with tiptoes to the top of the stair, to watch her parents putting the presents into the Christmas stocking. What will she believe? If she says that reason tells her one thing and faith tells her another, we expect her to choose reason as she grows up. If she continues to believe in Santa as the years go by, she's refusing to come to terms with reality. We may treat her with kindness and even think she's cute, but we will not take her seriously. If she goes on believing in Santa as an adult, we will conclude that she is insane. Is the God of the Bible, or the Jesus who rose from the dead, an adult version of Santa Claus? One can defend a myth of that kind by saying that it gives people comfort or allows them to think that death is not the end of everything. The myth may even be socially useful, provided it is kept within bounds. Even atheists sometimes worry about the moral consequences for society if religion disappears altogether. These are reasons for treating the story with a certain patronizing respect and for allowing believers to keep their illusions if they must. Christian theists can buy the tolerance of most agnostics if they retreat to the faith escape. The price is that they tacitly agree not to dispute the naturalistic doctrine that God, like Santa Claus and Zeus, is a product of human culture. In consequence, for intellectual purposes, Christianity ranks among what some call the higher superstitions, meaning the kinds of irrational behavior that are relatively respectable in polite society. Christian beliefs are studied in religious studies programs alongside primitive myths as subjective belief systems that are not based on scientific knowledge. So, that's mistake number 3. I said it was sophisticated, and one can argue that it is not so much a mistake as a rational defensive strategy born of desperation. In fact, I wouldn't blame Emilio if he were to break into the conversation at this point and reply in these words. What exactly is that? What exactly is that you want me to do? As a boy, I was taught to believe in literal Genesis story that contradicts modern science at just about every point. I can't defend that story now that I'm in university. I'd be buried under a mountain of evidence coming from experts who know far more about every subject than I do. I wouldn't have confidence in my own arguments, and I'd be labeled a crank, that is. My career in science would be over before I even got started. Unless I'm just going to give up and become an agnostic like most of the other students, I don't see what else I can do but rely on these defensive measures you call mistakes. Do you have a better idea? It's the right question to ask, and the answer is that I do. The rest of this book will be devoted to explaining that idea. Here, for a start, is what Emilio has to do if he is to master the challenge of evolution instead of having it master him. First, Emilio has to stop seeing this issue as a conflict between the Bible and science, in which the supposed problem is to decide between two complete stories, to believe uncritically in one or the other. As we shall see, evolutionary naturalists rely on a cultural stereotype to shut up all criticism of their philosophy. The stereotype portrays all opponents as extreme Genesis liberals, literalists, that is, who reject the evidence of science for purely religious reasons. As long as the conflict is perceived this way, the grave scientific defects in the ruling theory and the philosophical bias that sustains it can be effectively concealed from view. Second, Emilio needs to focus above all on what I call blind watchmaker thesis. This is the Darwinian claim that God was not necessary for biological creation because the impersonal material forces of genetic mutation and natural selection can and did produce all the fantastic complexity of living organisms. The scientific evidence is strongly against the blind man, the blind maker's thesis, and therefore strongly against the NABT's claim that a purposeless material process is our true creator. Thank you, Jesus. Third, Emilio has to learn that science, as defined in our culture, has a philosophical bias that needs to be exposed. On the one hand, science is empirical. This means that scientists rely on experiments, observations, calculations to develop theories and test them. On the other hand, contemporary science is naturalistic and materialistic in philosophy. What this means is that materialistic explanations for all phenomena are assumed to exist. And what that means is that the NABT's definition of evolution as an unsupervised process is simply true by definition, regardless of the evidence. It is a waste of time to argue about evidence if one side has already won the argument by defining the terms. I'll explain all these points in detail in subsequent chapters. First, I should explain why it's so important not only for Christians, but for everyone who loves the truth and wants to see it prevail, to understand how to deal rationally with the tyranny of Darwinism. I'll use U.S. culture as a case in point, though the situation takes a different form in other societies. Similar errors in thinking are widespread, as Emilio's letter makes clear. The United States of America at the beginning of the 21st century is in the most peculiar situation. This country is the world leader both in science and in setting cultural trends, but it is unusual among industrialized nations in its refusal to abandon the concept that God is our creator. Most Americans say they believe in God, and many of them really seem to mean it. Opinion polls indicate that no more than 1 out of 10 Americans accepts evolution in the NABT sense as a purposeless material system that accounts for all of life's history. Of the approximate 90% who attribute our existence to God, almost half are creationists, in the sense that they reject an evolutionary explanation of human origins altogether. The other half are like Emilio. They mistakenly think they have resolved the problem by viewing evolution as a God-guided system of gradual creation. Although most Americans believe in a creator, the intellectual culture is totally dominated by naturalism. Even in many colleges and seminaries that are formally religious, that God is an invention of human culture is taken for granted not only in the natural sciences, but throughout many departments in our universities, including religious studies departments. Many theologians and leaders of mainstream Christian denominations accept this situation or even endorse it, denouncing creationists for being ignorant troublemakers, as Emilio is learning to do. In short, the intellectual elite in America believe that God is dead. In consequence, they think that reason starts with the assumption that nature is all there is, and that a mindless evolutionary process absolutely must be our true creator. The common people aren't so sure of that, and some of them are very sure that God is alive. I agree with the common people. If we are right, the consequences are very, very important. The ruling naturalists know that too, although they may deny it. That is why they are so determined to define words like evolution and science in such a way that naturalism is true by definition. I therefore put the following simple proposition on the table for discussion. God is our true creator. I am not speaking of a God who is known only by faith and is invisible to reason, or who acted undetectably behind some naturalistic evolutionary process that was all appearance mindless and that was to all appearances mindless and purposeless. That kind of talk is about human imagination, not the reality of God. I speak of a God who acted openly and who left his fingerprints all over the evidence. Does such a God really exist, or is he a fantasy like Santa Claus? This is the subject of this book. The end of chapter 1.